The idea for this video began when I had the sudden realization that the Netflix dating show Love is Blind is both a polyamorous reality show and a dizzying speedrun on how normalized the most toxic elements of modern monogamy have become. Let me explain. So it's assumed that pretty much everyone is going to end up in a monogamous relationship, that is an exclusive sexual and romantic partnership with one other person to the exclusion of all others. Not only that, but this will happen via what is known as the relationship escalator, a series of milestones that you have to pass through: flirting, dating, becoming exclusive, having sex, saying I love you, moving in together, getting married, buying a house, having children. You get the idea. Traditionally, these aren't just expected, they are seen as essential requirements for a happy and fulfilled life. Monogamy has become more than just the idea of a one-on-one relationship. It's bound up with all these other expectations of behavior and life choices. More and more, however, people are questioning elements of this relationship escalator, deciding not to have children or to forgo marriage as an institution. In fact, a lot of people seem to be expressing an interest in forgoing the escalator entirely in favor of creating their own version of relationship happiness, including the possibility of non-monogamy. In a 2023 poll, YouGov found that 34% of American couples prefer some form of non-monogamy in their ideal relationship. In a similar YouGov survey from 2023, 12% of adults in the UK said that they either have been, are in, or are open to a polyamorous relationship. If you think about it, no other interpersonal relationships we have are treated with such a singular scarcity mindset as mainstream ideas of monogamous romance. No other type of human connection comes with these strict solo expectations of being everything to someone, being a sole priority in the same way. You aren't expected to only love one of your children or one of your parents at a time, because we understand that all other types of love are not finite. And yet when it comes to romantic relationships, monogamy as a model often comes with these ideas, pressures and expectations, and it's worse, leading to jealousy, obsession and possessiveness. So what might an alternative look like? There's a few terms that we're going to use in this video to talk about these kinds of relationships outside of traditional monogamy. Like with many words that we've invented to describe feelings and, identities and behaviors, coming up with a universally agreed definition that is true for all people who use that word all of the time is very difficult. I think it's especially true when dealing with intangible concepts like romance, love and connection. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to be covering all kinds of ethical or consensual non-monogamy, or ENM. So all types of ways that people might have relationships and connections outside of a one-on-one exclusive sexual and romantic partnership. Polyamory is often thought of as a sort of catch-all term. It's the reason why I used it in the title. It's what most people are used to. But many people do make a distinction between being polyamorous and being sexually non-monogamous, like being a swinger or being in a sexually open relationship. The idea being that polyamory, as the name suggests, is about having many loves, that the multiple relationships need to have a loving emotional connection as part of them for it to be polyamory. But again, because these are terms created to describe real life relationships and feelings, sometimes the edges of these definitions get a little bit blurry. For some people, these connections need to be specifically romantic to call them polyamory, but for others, romance itself is a subjective construct that doesn't need to be separated from a wider spectrum of connection. For some people, non-monogamy is about a lack of hierarchy, whereas for others, there is still hierarchical structures to their relationships. But the wide range of attitudes, practices, and desires that are part of relationships outside of monogamy is at the heart of what we're going to be exploring today. In this video, we're going to be asking, what might poly and CNM representation tell us not just about these relationships themselves, but also our wider cultural assumptions about love, sex, and what it means to be human? I just want to take a minute for a quick ad from today's sponsor, the Paired app, a relationship app that can help partners communicate and connect with daily conversation starters and advice from experts. There are quizzes, games, and questions to fill in and share together about everything from vacations to finances, memories to future dreams, with their timeline feature. It focuses on nurturing existing relationships to help you strengthen your bond and stay in love. Now, I don't have a romantic partner, so I asked my bestie Tazmyn to join the app with me instead to try it out, and it's actually been really great for building on our communication in a fun and casual way. Definitely feels like a great everyday way to check in purposefully, rather than serious, intimidating ideas of big conversations with some unspoken friction reaching crisis point. For any couples in my audience who want to try it, you can click my link below to get a 7-day free trial and 25% off Paired Premium to deepen your connection with your partner. Also wanted to point out that although the app is built for one-on-one romantic connections right now, when they first approached me, I had a dig around their website and found in their FAQs that they are open to hearing from poly people about how the app might work for other dynamics in the future. And it felt like the kind of people watching this video might be exactly who they wanted to hear from. All right, back to the video. The tropes. Let's start this deep dive by looking at this intertwined polycule relationship map of non-monogamy tropes. The stereotypes, the storylines we see repeated over and over, the representation that doesn't necessarily feel all that authentic, that can tell us a lot about wider attitudes towards non-monogamy. Let's start with non-monogamy is all about sex. In a world that valorizes the monogamous romantic relationship, particularly one between straight and cis people, as the pinnacle of achievement, people who stray from that model pose a problem, especially when they are happy and fulfilled within their own version of life. When we talk about the equal marriage debates of the 2010s and beyond, the problem was gay couples, even those in romantic monogamous relationships. Because if they could be happy, then maybe the traditional good model of a relationship between one man and one woman wasn't the only option. I think this is a part of the reason why queerness is so sexualized by those in opposition to our equality. Because within a historically sex-negative society, which has proclaimed sex as to be primarily for procreation and only within marriage, the fastest way to devalue a relationship is to accuse it of being all about sex. It's a way to separate the othered from normal people who understand sexual relationships that are real and meaningful, also have to be romantic in nature. I think we see the same impulse behind a lot of attitudes towards non-monogamy, that to give into a kind of relationship that isn't one man and one woman, these people must have unnatural appetites. It must be about greed or lust or other sinful temptations. I want to stress here, as I go through some examples of this on screen, that relationships built around sex between consenting parties shouldn't be demonized in the first place. It isn't inherently wrong or even bad representation to portray a purely or primarily sexual poly relationship on screen. But much the same as these other tropes, we have to look at the wider patterns.
People don't know how to talk about sex in a normal way. Like, people don't know how to talk about sex in the way that they talk about everything else. It has to be this like super shameful, super secret kind of like kind of the thing that you like giggle at. And that's kind of something that I see reflected in the media as well. People who are just embracing their sexuality, like enjoying themselves, not wanting to be in a relationship, are either seen as like indecisive or slutty, or something bad happens to them to kind of punish them for their morality or whatever.
Everyone's favorite sarcastic joker Chandler in Friends had a brief brush with polyamory in one episode of the show, which brings up a lot of ideas around polyamory as a highly sexual and hedonistic arrangement. Chandler starts dating a woman who has multiple partners, including a husband. At first, it seems like this is a great option for him, as he excitedly explains, "I get all the good stuff, all the fun, all the talking, all the sex, and none of the responsibility. I mean, this is every guy's fantasy." But he also begins to wonder why she needs all these other partners, to question her abundant sexuality when as a woman she's assumed to be the one with the lower libido in a relationship. That gendered background idea around sex reflects back onto Chandler, calling into question his own masculinity, why he isn't enough for her. He questions if she could or even should leave these other guys and be just with him. He's threatened by her bringing in a new guy after him. The cultural norm of monogamy imposes on her character and her relationships so many judgments, and ultimately comes back around to the idea of monogamy as the relationship type that works in the long run. These insecurities of not being enough for a partner who is poly are, to me, quite obviously socially constructed. You don't have more than one child because the first wasn't enough to satisfy your parental feelings or needs. You aren't expected to stick to one friend at a time in a platonic kind of monogamy because you should be enough for each other. It then also seems to suggest that poly people with multiple partners are both unable to provide for the way that they should for a partner, or they have unnatural appetites for sex, love, or other needs which are impossible to satisfy. Another way we see this manifest on screen is in the often interlinked storylines of polyamory and cheating.
Firstly, it draws a link between polyamory and infidelity, which I think is very disingenuous. And secondly, it implies that all people who are non-monogamous or polyamorous were failed monogamists first. That they couldn't do monogamy in some way, or were really bad at it, or polyamory was their last resort in some way, or a saving grace for their relationship.
One of the most well-known shows about polyamory is You, Me, Her, where a couple, Emma and Jack, unable to have a baby and with a lacking sex life, end up bringing in a third to their relationship, an escort named Izzy. The initial connection is between Izzy and Jack, when Jack books a session with her without telling Emma. Although Jack and Izzy don't have sex, sex, they do talk, drink, and make out during that first session. Although it was popular enough to run for 5 seasons, a lot of poly people have talked about the limitations of the show, seemingly portraying a realistic dynamic only insofar as it's realistic that some people go into non-monogamy without really knowing anything about it and just sort of continue to bring their issues and toxicity to the dynamic. As one Reddit users joked, I just want them to connect with their local poly community, maybe read a book. Izzy seems to be the only one that has done any homework. It seems to many to continue the dynamic of the imperfect couple and the outsider third, with another Reddit user concluding, Jack and Emma have a terrible, borderline toxic dynamic. Like, it's some kind of default that they're always treating Izzy as if she's secondary to their OG relationship. They should be including her in conversations about the relationship, and Izzy should be an equal partner, but they almost always talk about and to her like a child. We see another example of this in the episode Silver Bells of Ally McBeal. The case of the week involves a poly triad and runs with the idea that polyamory is ultimately a version of cheating, with one or more partner inevitably unhappy or unfulfilled with the arrangement, but being coerced into it or reluctantly agreeing rather than something that people might get into together enthusiastically. In the episode, 3 people come to a judge looking to be allowed a 3-way marriage license. Our lead Ally is uncomfortable from the start with being assigned the case, and we quickly learn that this whole thing started with, you guessed it, an unhappy marriage. James, the man in this throuple, was bored and unfulfilled in his marriage to Mindy until he met his new love, Patty, at work and began a relationship with her. Although they speak about the 3-way relationship making them all feel closer emotionally, as well as being practical help with child rearing and work schedules, ultimately the judge denies their request. And more than that, Mindy seems to agree with the judge as this being the right thing, seemingly exposing reluctance within a well-functioning poly relationship from the outside. Throughout the episode, our leading lady affirms monogamy as the right choice and feels sorry for Mindy and her partner's legal cheating. I think we also see the sexualized and moralized idea of polyamory in the ways that it mirrors other existing tropes, the depraved bisexual being an obvious one to me. From Sharon Stone's Catherine Chummel in Basic Instinct to Matt Damon's Tom Ripley in The Talented Mr. Ripley, their devious, seductive power knows no limits. If you want to create a character who breaks the laws of morality through violence, theft, or manipulation, you know what, why not also have them break unspoken cultural laws as well? President Frank Underwood in House of Cards, whose body count grows exponentially with each season, is a classic example of a non-monogamous villain. He and his wife Claire have multiple other sexual partners outside their marriage. We can see how it might be an aspect of the characters which, when viewed through the lens of mononormativity, would emphasize their self-serving and ambitious natures. Similarly, the character of Judy King in Orange is the New Black gives us a poly character whose immorality is often linked to her non-monogamy. She uses sex as a weapon of blackmail and a payment for favors, and seems to have a transactional relationship with other people in the show, being accused of keeping them around for her own pleasure and amusement. And this perfectly connects with some of the most negative attitudes towards polyamorous people, painting them as fundamentally selfish, pursuing whatever pleasure they wish without responsibilities or care for others. And then we come to the mountain of evidence of our sexualizing framing of polyamory that is horny reality dating shows. The obvious examples are those shows that focus around non-monogamy as their premise. Let me introduce you to Couple to Throuple. It's a reality dating show about, exactly what it sounds like. The show asks, if you were given the chance at non-monogamy in paradise, what would you say? A group of 4 couples is shown an array of sexy singles ready to dive into their relationship. And by that, the show means into their bed. The choice of hosting the show in a tropical paradise isn't just about the fantasy isolation. It's also so all the singles can be wearing bikinis and swim shorts as much as possible. The trailer marketing the show has a lot of night goggles style shots of bed sheets and body parts before the host quips that they'll be giving them a bed big enough for 3. And the montage of shots starts including daylight shots of these throuples making out, grinding, and generally pushing the boundaries of airable heavy petting at all times of the day. They talk about having uncontrollable boners surrounded by all of these hot people. Like, very clearly this show is selling the idea that the appeal of a throuple is sex. Although the show emphasizes that it includes an expert to help them along the way, the reality show format means that the way that these conversations around boundaries and explorations of comfort levels are often being discovered is through sexy group challenges designed to get, honestly, the best or worst, in this case, reaction shots of upset, angry, and jealous partners. The emotional aspects of compatibility in the show are often tied to sexual connection. Not just that you need to both have a spark with the single being invited into your couple, but also the jealousy or feeling or the resentment is often tied to watching sexual intimacy between your partner and the single person. Other reality shows exploring non-monogamy have fallen into a similarly sex-heavy format. The UK show Open House, The Great Sex Experiment being another such example. It again starts with couples wanting to explore opening up up their relationship. They're taken to a sexually liberating retreat hosted by a polyamorous couple and a therapist to help them on their journey. Channel 4 seems to equate polyamory with the purely sexual in their own press releases and applications for the show. They describe it as following previously monogamous couples as they experiment in open sexual relationships for the first time, in an attempt to see if monogamy is an outdated concept in modern relationships. There's nothing wrong with this kind of non-monogamy which is specifically tied to an expansion of sexual intimacy, but the application for the show seems to also suggest that it isn't sex-specific, saying each couple get the opportunity to meet and date the retreat's residents, using the word date in particular connected to ideas of dating and romance over a purely sexual connection, and yet in the same form it says it is a social experiment television series where committed couples come to a luxury retreat to test whether opening up their relationships and having sex with other people will strengthen their bond. It's a messy indistinction that I think comes from the many ways that sex and romance are seen as inextricably linked in our society, and it's not just what's on screen but what's left out which can tell us something about these sexualized attitudes to polyamory in modern society. There is, across almost all poly representation, a total lack of polyamorous parents and families. Even people who might consider themselves fairly liberal and open seem to have this mental block when it comes to the idea of polyamory around children. The idea of a triad or polycule where one or more of those involved is a parent. There's something that feels, to many people, instinctively icky about it. It's so similar to that same idea that I've seen around gay marriage. How can we explain this to kids? They shouldn't be exposed to that lifestyle. The answer's the same, right? Just because gay anal sex gives you the homophobic heebie-jeebies, Carol, it doesn't mean that gay parents are any more likely to tell their kids about their sex lives than straight people are to tell theirs about their unfulfilling missionary sex. Poly relationships might be unusual family setups, but it's just as easy to explain to a kid as divorce and step-parents, or relatives raising other relatives' children, or any number of other configurations. Kids don't know cultural norms until they're taught them, and so don't know something is unusual until they're told that either. And it isn't just that representations of polyamory are sexualized, it's that this sexualization is so widespread as an attitude that it seems like it's affecting the way that we see non-sexualized poly relationships when they're presented on screen. I read an article on polyamory on screen, and this quote stuck out to me. I see examples of this trope in works like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where Scott's roommate Wallace Wells is in a loosely defined relationship with two other men, or Sense8, where the act of connection is often depicted as big joyous screwfests. Because yes, the show Sense8 does have some iconic sensual scenes, but it also has romantic, platonic and familial relationships alongside. The show is a modern sci-fi classic about a group of 8 strangers around the world who suddenly become mentally connected. They can inhabit each other's bodies, feel each other's emotions, use each other's skills and languages. They form this intense emotional connection, and they also share this unique bodily connection too. A character experiences another's PMS, and there are a number of times that they feel feelings of pleasure and arousal simultaneously too. But I don't think that this diminishes the representation. The show has a lead who has polyamorous parents. It has a gay male couple who end up in a complex and loving relationship with a straight woman. The finale ends with a fan favorite love triangle being resolved, with all of them being together in a triad. Throughout the series, the pressures of tradition have had the woman Carla mentally warring between the socially respectable husband Rajan and the mysterious criminal she is now connected to, Wolfgang. But the writers decided at the end to acknowledge the authenticity of her love for both of them, the way that that love might bring those two men closer as they find connection in their joint feelings for her, and the casual, why not, of these guys deciding that they should try being in a romantic and sexual relationship with each other as well as with her. Sex is a part of most romantic relationships, and yet the sexualized view of polyamory means that portrayals of sex within a romantic poly context on screen seem to be viewed as overwhelmingly sexual. Non-monogamy is just a phase. This old classic. Any expression of sexuality or gender outside of strict norms seems to get hit with this idea that it is a temporary mistake. And we see this in a very meta way baked into a whole bunch of TV shows, with the way that poly storylines are often one-off arcs, even relegated to individual episodes. It's literally temporary in the lives of characters and the experience of the audience. Procedural shows are based around one-off characters and plots, with the mystery solved solved or antagonist defeated in a tight 60 minutes max. iZombie, for example, has an episode around the death of a painter. At first they think his wife killed him because he was having an affair, but it's revealed that the wife knew about her husband's lovers. However, rather than being a twist on the trope of polyamory as not real or sustainable, they reveal that she is the murderer after all, and it was motivated by jealousy. But it wasn't jealousy because he was with someone else, but because one of his lovers was pregnant, even though he'd claimed to never want children. Even this pair of bohemian artists that claimed to be okay with their open relationship couldn't make it work, because one of them had to be feeling normal emotions of resentment and jealousy, right? This is the end of a one-off glimpse into non-monogamous representation, and therefore that's where the topic is left in the show and for the audience. The short-lived nature of some storylines mean that even when the representation isn't overtly critical or negative, they still aren't seen in the wider world of the show or for the audience as something other than a one-off oddity. The Boston Legal episode Word Salad Days includes the case of a man and his two wives, where although a judge rules against the legality of his marriage to more than one woman, the three of them seem to have a healthy and balanced dynamic. The story ends with the original married couple agreeing to divorce to ensure an equality between the three of them. The show doesn't undermine their relationship, but it's also not something that's allowed to be part of ongoing plots or legitimized by being something that's part of the main character's storylines either. However, we do also see a similar idea of polyamory as a temporary dalliance in longer plots too. Many viewers have criticized the L Word reboot's handling of Alice's poly storyline. The show iconically centers around the lives of a group of lesbians, and as such is arguably poised to explore issues of gender, sexuality, and romance more than a lot of other mainstream shows. Yet, the messy connections between Alice, girlfriend Nat, and Nat's ex-wife Gigi have become a source of frustration for some audience members. The whole thing begins with a drunken threesome, and season 1 ends with the throuple breaking up in favour of Alice and Nat together monogamously. Except then, in season 2, we get a continuation of this story as Nat realises that she wants to be in a poly relationship after all, and Alice tries to make it work, but ultimately they break up. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with portraying this trajectory. I'm sure it rings true to some viewers even. The frustration came with the way that the story was handled on screen, or rather, wasn't handled. The decision to open up their relationship in season 2 isn't shown. As one critic pointed out about the breakup episode Luck Be a Lady, the lack of character development between then and now makes it difficult to see this as anything other than empty, forced conflict, especially given how badly last episode bungled the conversation too, with Nat throwing out casually biphobic remarks and Alice conflating polyamory with cheating. Here we see polyamory being used as a temporary plot device to cause conflict, rather than something to be authentically explored. This phase attitude towards polyamory is also evident in the lack of older polyamorous representation. By relegating to the world of youthful folly and immature states, there's this implication that polyamory is something that older people will inevitably have left behind. It feels like dating reality shows about polyamorous people would be a clear opportunity to include older contestants in comparison to the monogamous alternative shows. After all, you can't argue that older people should already have found love to exclude them from production, and these are not people who are necessarily subscribing to the idea of one-on-one love in the first place. And yet, if I use the example of the polyamorous dating show I talked about earlier, Couple to Throuple, they're all young people. And yes, I'm aware that young people are cool and hot and they need to make sure that the ages line up so it's age appropriate for any of the couples to pair with any of the singles. But arguably letting 18-year-olds onto internationally broadcast dating shows is the weirder decision here. This idea of polyamory as a phase is also included in shows where rejecting polyamory is used to kind of express real commitment to a singular partner. The idea that being serious and official is dictated entirely by cutting off all other romantic prospects and partners. And I think a lot of people are familiar with this idea in their own monogamous dating lives, that you might be going on dates with multiple people for a while and then stop dating all but one of them when you decide that they are like the one that you want to pursue. But in the real world, this most often happens reasonably early in that process. Yes, it's time to talk about Love is Blind that I hinted at the beginning of this video. It's a reality show where contestants spend a handful of weeks cut off from the rest of the world, relentlessly going on dates. These dates are hosted in so-called pods, meaning that they are one-on-one, but the two people on the date can't see each other while the date is happening. The idea of the show is asking whether these people can fall for someone's personality and what's inside them, and then when they see them and spend time with them on the outside world, if they're willing to marry them 6 weeks later. It's classic straight people protecting the sanctity of marriage stuff. The producers of Love is Blind have created a show where quite often people fall in love with multiple people at the same time. Every season we have these contestants who are ready to marry either one of two, sometimes even three people that they have been simultaneously dating and falling for by the end of their time in the pods. And a lot of these people end up seeming desperate for that decision to be taken out of their hands because they cannot separate their feelings for the two two people. Oftentimes they love them for different reasons, they connect with them in different ways, but they have a similar level of intimacy, romantic feelings towards two or more different people. They kind of want those people to choose for them. Often it seems like they really hope that one of them who also is dating someone else, that person will propose, and then they'll by default be like, oh, okay, you're the person that I'm actually going to be marrying, because they find it so hard to decide on the one. They are so close to acknowledging polyamory as a legitimate relationship dynamic in this show, but instead we see over the course of the season the intense hold that monogamy has on the show itself and those participating in it. Obviously the format ending in marriage is part of that, but also the dismissal of the feelings for multiple people. The idea that having deep romantic connections with more than one person at a time is an insult to those people, and it can't be real, that a choice has to be made. More than that the only legitimate and true way of being in love is to have someone choose you and only you. There have been multiple, especially women on the show, who are intensely emotional and committed to the idea that they want someone who chooses them, that is the real marker of love.
I think with reality shows, it's so, like you said, it lays bare the pressure cooker of the relationship escalator. We got to do it. We got to do it fast. I got to figure out in 10 days who I'm about to marry. I mean, talk about like it feeding capital, because it's like for the show and for to make money and stuff. And so there's producers actually literally pressuring them. But it's I think you see people like almost feel heartbroken that they have to choose.
Not just chooses them, but chooses them to the exclusion of all others. In fictional media, this idea of polyamory as a phase is strengthened by storylines which use it as a realization of a character's like true feelings for one person. This might be a couple trying to fix or save an existing relationship through an open marriage, a love triangle storyline, or a single person who tries polyamory only to realize that they actually only want one person after all. A pretty clear example of this is the romance movie Newness, released in 2017. Initially leads Martin and Gabriella get together, but descend into jealousy, self-doubt, and paranoia. Gabriella grows suspicious of like photos of a mysterious girl in Martin's parents' house, which turn out to be his dead sister, and sees him like not mentioning his mother's dementia as a sign of the failure in their relationship and intimacy too. They argue and both end up cheating on each other. And their solution to this is, oh, we'll make it an open relationship, as if that's gonna help them deal with the issues that they already had of jealousy and self-doubt and paranoia. It obviously doesn't work. They break up. Rather than dealing with the original issues between them, the movie ends with them dramatically declaring their love for each other and how they were never really into the open relationship thing, and that's happily ever after. We can see how overwhelmingly there's this idea of polyamory being doomed from the start, that the ultimate reason that it's a phase is because it can't stand the test of time. It's fundamentally broken. And when we have so few portrayals of healthy polydynamics, it's understandable that the massive individual examples of polyamory gone wrong seem to give the message that it's something that will always fail, rather than it being not right for those specific characters in that particular storyline. Non-monogamy is crazy. There are some representations of non-monogamy which don't have it there specifically as a phase, but only because they're pointing out that these characters will never be mature or sane or normal enough to grow out of it, that it stems from maladaptive coping mechanisms or psychological trauma. British TV drama Wanderlust involves a couple both having affairs and then deciding an open relationship is the way to solve their marital issues. The show was notorious for its numerous sex scenes, but the ultimate message of the show comes in the form of an episode-long therapy session where we learn that the main character Joy's sexual promiscuity is actually more of a self-destructive coping mechanism brought on by trauma. The couple are reunited full circle by the end, and we're kind of led to assume that this has all been a fun journey of a lesson that's now in their past. The root of polyamory has been uncovered, and the recovery looks like monogamy. We also see polyamory being used as a sign of like a fear of commitment or some other psychological deficit that means that they can't be in a normal or healthy relationship. Sometimes this is explicit in the script too. Characters literally say it. In the show Degrassi, one couple, Jack and Imogen, initially agree to a kind of non-monogamous arrangement after Imogen confesses her love for Jack, and Jack says, I don't know, I think we should break up. I didn't really see this as exclusive, not looking for a monogamous thing, asking if Imogen knows about polyamory. But very soon after, Jack confesses that she only said that she didn't love Imogen and wanted to try polyamory because she was actually scared of commitment. And so they decide to be exclusive and to leave that nonsense polyamory in the past now that Jack has gone through the hero's journey, self-reflection, and realized it was just a crutch for her immaturity all along. non-monogamy is just misogyny. There's a critique which I think comes from cultural ideas of polygamy or like plural marriage, that non-monogamous relationships are inherently sexist, patriarchal, and exploitative. In the United States, there is a particular modern fascination with fundamentalist Mormons who believe in the principle, aka plural marriage, where one man has many wives. I mean, truly, if you look at the number of commissioned TV shows about it, people are obsessed with this. Most recently, we've been bombarded with media depicting extreme forms of religious polygamy, often linked to extreme misogyny and abuse. There have been numerous documentaries about Warren Jeffs, the leader of the FLDS, alone, from Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey to Prophet of Evil. In the award-winning Under the Banner of Heaven, a miniseries based on the real murder of Brenda Lafferty, we see Ron and Dan Lafferty become radicalized and go from LDS members to religious extremists who believe in polygamy and blood atonement. In both the case of the Lafferty brothers and the LFDS, polygamy overlaps with pedophilia and incest. Christina Rossetti writes in The Revealer, as the Lafferty brothers entered Robert Crossfield's orbit, they became interested in polygamy and sought to practice the early Mormon doctrine. By the time of the murders, Crossfield advocated for incestuous marriage and married at least one of his biological children. Like Crossfield, Dan Lafferty's attempt at a polygamous union involved grooming his own daughter to marry him. Under the Banner of Heaven, Rossetti argues, portrays this abuse as the outcome of polygamy's slippery slope. Polygamy in these contexts is a social construct created exclusively to control and abuse women and girls. The Handmaid's Tale sees a version of religious non-monogamous marriages where commanders in this dystopian world have both a wife and a so-called handmaid. In the world of Gilead, they almost downplay the corrupted traditional monogamous marriage by reducing women to their specific roles so that no woman counts as like a full person. Handmaids are walking wombs, wives are mothers, Marthas are domestic caretakers. The position taken within the ceremony, which ritualizes attempts to conceive a child through the rape of a handmaid in the marriage bed, drives this home where the handmaid overlaps her body with the wife and they combine into one woman. Of course, not all portrayals of religious polygamy are as dark as that. If you're an American millennial, your first exposure to the concept of plural marriage was probably Sister Wives, a reality TV show on TLC that followed man Cody Brown and his then 4 wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin. While the show did rely on polygamy as a source of conflict and dramatic tension, Sister Wives also depicted the Brown family as relatively normal. In a review for Sloan, Shyla Velasco wrote, rather than merely emphasizing what's different about the Brown family, most obviously their plural marriage, Sister Wives shows us how normal they seem, loving and good-natured around their children, occasionally prone to envy and feelings of betrayal. Another representation of a healthier version of religious polygamy came about with the HBO series Big Love, which followed a polygamous family in Utah. Nevertheless, these shows still portray polygamy and patriarchy as inextricably linked. The wives orbit their husbands, and their family structure props up the patriarch as the primary authority in the household. I think seeing these depictions of polygamy as a patriarchal religious institution, or even a sign of religious fanaticism, affects how audiences understand non-religious polyamory and non-monogamy too. That the abundance of this kind of media, especially with a lack of wider polyrepresentation, could end up with audiences assuming that all non-monogamy is patriarchal by default. And that simply isn't the case. In fact, I don't think we can argue that plural marriage itself, marriage between more than one person, is any more inherently patriarchal than monogamous marriage. Child brides are not unique to polygamy. Incest isn't unique to polygamy. Abusive relationships aren't unique to polygamy. Marriage revolving around the needs of a husband over a wife is not unique to polygamy. Using God and instruments of religion to coerce women into reproductive labor, again, sadly not unique to polygamy. The framing of these shows, especially those invested in selling these sensationalist images of the subject matter, often revolve around showing polygamy as a danger equated with these other issues. There's a show about women leaving fundamentalist organizations called Escaping Polygamy. Not escaping extremism or escaping abuse, it's just escaping polygamy. Perhaps one of the reasons why we as a society are so drawn towards stories of religious polygamy is because it gives us an excuse to not reckon with the patriarchal and abusive structures that might be found within our own normal monogamous relationships too. Portrayals of atheist polygamy still rely on the idea that plural relationships exist as a patriarchal power structure. Take Negan in The Walking Dead, for example. When he first appears on the show, Negan has several wives. He's an atheist, and for him, polygamy is just a way of flexing his power. He says, I've always wanted to screw a whole bunch of different women. Why settle for just one? Why follow the same old rules? Why not make life better? Negan's wives agree to this relationship for reasons of security. They aren't happy, they aren't free from coercion, and if they want to have sex with anyone else, they surrender the protection that he offers them. Once again, polygamy becomes conflated conflicted with an abuse of power. It's notable that Negan's backstory reveals him to be a devoted husband, at least once the apocalypse started. His commitment to his relationship with his dying wife aims to make him a more sympathetic character. Through this narrative lens, polygamy villainizes him and monogamy partially attempts to redeem him. Negan's one of those annoying examples of violent man loves his dead wife, isn't he so complicated characters, you know? Even less toxic portrayals of polyamorous relationships still often revolve around this idea of what a male fantasy should look like. One of the most common forms of polyrepresentation is a throuple with one man and two bi women. We've seen it in You Me Her, in Vicky Cristina Barcelona, Transparent, and more. And while those relationships do exist and aren't like inherently toxic or sexist, the overrepresentation of this dynamic ultimately reinforces an idea that polyamory is just for the fulfillment of straight men and their desires for power and sex. In addition to its patriarchal associations, the perception of non-monogamy as inherently immoral is reinforced by the narratives that rely on conflict derived from polyamory: jealousy, cheating, and lying. Ironically, sometimes it seems that the only characters who get to have satisfying polyamorous relationships are villains. In The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the antagonists regularly reference non-monogamy. While polyamory isn't itself necessarily malicious in the show, it signifies a less virtuous path in many ways. In the show, monogamy represents true love and redemption, whereas polyamory represents hedonism and passion. The Polly in the Media blog's post about Sabrina shows how well-worn the trope is in that show. Polyamory is just a minor point, but it is consistently used to show just how villainous the villains are, and possibly even to point out who are the true villains and who might be heroes. And this perception of polyamory as not just being unusual or outside of the norm, but like actively immoral, can affect actual poly people in the real world.
There is real risk to challenging the norm in any way, shape, or form that queer people especially know, but straight people learn when they want to be polyamorous. It's like, yeah, you're letting go of some of the social benefits. You're inviting some social judgment, and there is real risk of like, it's not a protected class, so sometimes people get fired, you know, if they're like not moral, not morality clause or whatever. Not so. Yeah, you just risk reward, you know, is challenging that still easier than, you know, having to hide who you are and how you love. And that's a very personal decision.
Even if you don't identify as polyamorous, seeing polyrepresentation on screen can help expand our ideas of what relationships, love, and intimacy should look like. At its best, polyrepresentation might force audiences to reckon with the possibility that many of our cultural norms around relationships might in fact be harmful to monogamous and non-monogamous people alike. And it might not even be that audience members will ever be interested in a non-monogamous relationship dynamic for themselves, but it might allow them to expand what their own monogamous relationship looks like. The norm of monogamy also comes with certain assumptions and expectations that I mentioned at the start of this video. For example, as part of monogamy, it might also be assumed that your romantic partner should be able to fulfill all of your emotional needs, that monogamous relationship dynamics are instinctual for everyone, that you should only develop romantic and sexual feelings for one person at a time. We can see how authentic portrayals of polyamory, especially healthy and happy ones, might allow viewers to question these assumptions. Not just that, but also allow them to question any guilt, shame, or confusion that might come with not aligning perfectly with this assumed monogamous norm. People who don't find monogamous partnerships natural or instinctual to them, those who find the idea of one person automatically becoming their sole interpersonal priority limiting or overwhelming, those who find themselves able to fall in romantic love with multiple people at a time. In fact, we might end up questioning the origins of monogamy itself and why those in power might benefit from keeping it as part of the status quo. There are a lot of different factors which historically seem to have contributed to the creation of monogamous societies in the modern world, but it seems to most often be tied to ideas of ownership and scarcity of various kinds. Monogamy allows for paternal certainty, with one man and one woman certain that they are the parents of a child that they will raise and provide for, which becomes especially important as inheritance becomes an option. That is, when we get societies productive enough for there to be something left to pass on when you die, it ensures a reasonable level of stability if it is universally agreed upon that this is how issues of excess wealth are dealt with. And conversely, fears of resource scarcity might be alleviated in time periods where men are expected to provide for women and children in their family. If there are fewer dependents, for example, one wife and 2.5 kids, this becomes more manageable. The assumption that everyone will end in a married monogamous romantic relationship, probably with children, is ultimately part of the way that our society is structured from the ground up. The type of housing we build, its size, setup, and affordability are geared towards couples. Private healthcare might be available through a spouse or parent, but not through other close relationships. Disability benefits and support infrastructure often assume a romantic partner will take on carer duties. Access to visas and reunification are based on traditional monogamous models of family. The insular nature of the nuclear family is also kind of the perfect way to encourage isolated consumption, especially in a capitalist society which discourages the sharing of goods and possessions in favor of each household purchasing everything they need, even if only for a handful of days a year. In the examples of successful, happy, polyamorous relationships, we might also see examples of sustainable community models.
I think in general, all over the world, a lot of people are sort of waking up to the fact that if they don't have a sense of community, they want to get it now. They want to build community more. There's a lot more talk about like, we need to keep each other safe if we don't feel safe in, you know, the political climate. And so I think that really comes down to like, are we willing to work as a team? Or are we feeling like isolated and possessive and, you know, really stuck in our roles? And so if we're imagining building out a network of chosen family, whether you sleep with somebody or not, that's your choice, you know? But can there be this like inclusive, welcoming, challenging of our possessiveness, challenging of a sense of ownership, so that we can have that like feeling that we're taken care of and that we're taking care of other people. So you can absolutely have community without being non-monogamous. I just think the work required to have a good time in non-monogamy or have a good time in polyamory, it's similar work to challenging what you got to challenge when you're building out a community of any kind. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Some portrayals of polyamory explore the possibilities of questioning the status quo. My favorite show of all time, it's no secret, is Black Sails, and it actually has multiple poly dynamics, which are part of characters exploring the difference between culturally defined morality and their own sense of right and wrong. The lead in the show is Captain Flint. He's a feared and ruthless pirate, but he's also the devoted partner of Miranda, an English woman banished from high society because of their affair. It's revealed in the second season of the show that the affair that they are being punished for was in fact a romance between Flint and Miranda's husband Thomas, wholly known about and consented to by all three parties. Flint and Miranda find a desperate harbour in each other after Thomas's death, but even out in the lawless world of piracy, they struggle to figure out what they are to each other as a pair without him. We see them attempt to solidify their intimacy with sex, which clearly doesn't feel right, unlike the glimpses of Thomas and Flint's sexual intimacy we see in the past. They argue nearly constantly about wider visions of social and political change and instability, unlike the clear respect and joy that Miranda and Thomas shared in hosting gatherings of intellectuals and reformers at their home in England before. Their unusual but loving triad was a source of joy and fulfillment to all three of them. Without one of its members, the remaining two are adrift, much like romantic notions of monogamous partners after one passes. The show acknowledges the unique bonds between each pair in the triad, but also the strength of the three of them together. Similarly, the show creates what we might label as queer platonic development to a couple who were originally together romantically and sexually at the start of the show and who we assume to be heterosexual. Real-life pirates Anne Bonny and Jack Rackham begin Black Sails as partners in pretty much every way, but in season 2, in a parallel storyline to our tragic triad of Miranda, Flint and Thomas, Anne begins to question essentially the compet of it all. She starts to fall for another woman, Max, and soon the two of them and Jack are in bed together, seeing if they can make this whole thing work. It's clear at first that Jack is struggling with losing Anne if she decides to be romantically involved only with Max and not with him, because he struggles to see how to keep Anne close, to show how important they are to each other, to trust that she won't abandon him without it being in the known setup of a relationship. It's Anne who puts it to him plainly when she inevitably accepts her queerness and realizes that they need to change the nature of their connection away from romantic and sexual to something else just as important to her, telling him, "I was in every tavern in that town trying to find our spies, build out this thing we started, and every time I said my name, they knew my name, and the first thing that they said every time was your name, like we was two halves of the same thing. I can't be your wife, Jack, but you and I are going to be partners until they put us in the fucking ground." There is such potential freedom and intimacy in these ideas of being allowed to explore doing relationships that work for individuals rather than assuming that they have to prescribe to existing molds of monogamy. There's interesting evidence of just this in the crossover and solidarity that exists between the poly community and the asexual and aromantic communities. The similarities of experiences are so stark to me, like the invalidation of intimate relationships that don't fit the norm, the way you have to go through a process of questioning and breaking down assumptions about what is necessary within those relationships and outside of them. It might seem like there would be a separation there, but actually a lot of people find themselves as part of both communities. Ace people who are uninterested in sex with their romantic partners, opening up that part of their relationship. Aromantic people in poly, queer, platonic dynamics with more than one person. Ace people within polycules, which allow for them to be as equally connected and supported by their partners, rather than be cut off from familial intimacy because they can't provide traditional expectations of sex and romance. One of my favorite portrayals of this kind of ethical non-monogamy that I've seen as an ace person myself is in Everything Is Going to Be Okay. It's a brilliant comedy show from Australian writer and actor Josh Thomas about a man who unexpectedly becomes the guardian of his two teen half-sisters after their dad dies. One of the sisters, Matilda, ends up starting a relationship with one of her best friends, another autistic girl named Drea. However, she realizes that although she loves being in this intimate relationship with Drea, she isn't attracted to her sexually. She doesn't want to have sex with her at all. And Drea in turn realizes that she's an asexual lesbian. But rather than breaking up, assuming that these labels were incompatible with what a relationship should look like, they figure out a way to create a partnership that works for them both, with Matilda exploring sexual hookups with guys that they meet on dating apps in a communicative, open relationship. Diverse representations of polyamory help expand our cultural ideas around who polyamory is for, especially the idea that it is for only certain types of people at all.
I guess as someone who like ticks many boxes on the kind of diversity checklist, like, you know, like I'm I'm autistic and ADHD, so yeah, I guess, you know, I'm disabled, I'm queer, I'm bisexual, right? I'm like a woman of color, a woman with a massive asterisk, but we can ignore that for the moment. And I'm also polyamorous. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think that, you know, for me, like as a kind of polyamorous person of color, when I was kind of dealing with like talking to my family about these concepts, there was this idea that like polyamory was like a white thing to do. And even though, you know, historically, like, you know, like people of color, like especially indigenous tribes, like they practice various forms of non-monogamy, like, you know, and there's there's like a matriarchal like polyandrous tribe in China somewhere, so it's not like unheard of. But yeah, like I think like just dealing with the intersection between like kind of race and non-monogamy has been interesting in that way.
While researching for this video, the main thing that came back again and again with examples I found was how fleeting and random they seemed. There didn't seem to be a real consistent overarching flow between different iconic characters and shows. Instead, we see examples like Jerry's parents in Rick and Morty, who turn up kind of as a funny way of calling Jerry uncle for like not being chill about their partner Jacob, or one-off films like Professor Marsden and the Wonder Woman, which was inspired by the real-life creator of Wonder Woman. It was pretty well received by poly audiences, but hasn't resulted in a continued legacy of wider poly representation that we might follow in the same way that we see with queer representation in the celluloid closet-style documentaries. And that itself is indicative of the way that polyamory is seen as an individualistic and self-absorbed decision, rather than a legitimate dynamic that can, in reality, create webs of interwoven community. I think that the hope seems to be for polyamorous representation where being poly is not entirely where the crises and drama is drawn from.
People like to make polyamory the center of the story's drama, when actually what I would love is for, you know, more representation of like polyamorous people just existing, and then, you know, like the conflicts and the drama that's happening is not to do with their relationship. Like they're like, you know, people who are like facing this together, like as a polycule.
I think there's such potential in healthy non-monogamous representation to highlight a need for better communication between partners, whether poly or not, without foregone conclusions and assumptions of how any aspect of a relationship should work. At its best, it might allow more people to explore ways in which their relationships can be focused on real needs and desires rather than set models and default expectations. And at its best, it might allow more people to explore ways in which all their relationships can be focused on real needs and desires rather than set models and default expectations. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you would like to help support me make videos like this one in the future, then I will leave a link to my Patreon and Ko-fi in the description. Also, off the back of working on this video, I think that I am going to end up working on a video around aromanticism. I think that there's a lot of crossover with this and the idea of like breaking down what exactly is romance, what is it for, so look out for that. That will be coming hopefully later this year. Also on my Patreon, I've been experimenting with behind the scenes videos that I film after filming the main video, so I'm about to go into doing one now, which are looking at like things we didn't have time to include, any other thoughts, sort of an expansion of stuff that didn't make it into the actual video essay. And there are some really cool perks that come along with being a patron, including access to my Discord, there's care packages, there's postcards, there's a recommendation list that I send out every month with different like TV shows, movies, plays, books, podcasts that I think you should check out. And until I see you next time, bye.